Help, my child is an atheist. Insight into the mind of an atheist. Atheist, a person who does not believe in the existence of a god or any gods, one who subscribes to or advocates atheism. Introduction. So your child has outed themselves as an atheist. Now what? You're probably panicking, terrified your child is going to hell, and you are ready to do anything to prevent that. This is an understandable reaction, but one you must control and quash as soon as possible before you do something you'll regret. It is highly possible you will experience your child's rejection of your faith as a rejection of you. This is understandable because your faith likely forms an important part of your identity. Please be assured, however, that this is not the case, that your child's rejection of faith is not a rejection of you. If it were, do you think they would have come to you and admitted their loss of faith? I doubt it. Instead, you must see your child's confession as an act of love and trust, not to be taken lightly. It is vital that you recognize this revelation for what it likely is, a traumatic life event, complete with all the stages of grief: disbelief, anger, bargaining, depression, and ultimately acceptance. But do not fear, as this journey does not need to be as tumultuous as it might first appear. With proper actions and reactions from yourself, with the guidance of this video, the final acceptance might just turn out to be the acceptance of your child back into the faith. What not to do. Do not punish your child. This is so important for you to understand. Do not punish your child. If they have come to you and told you straight on, it means that they love you and trust you. Do not punish that love and trust, or you might lose it forever. And you will need that love and trust if there is ever to be any hope of them returning to God. Do not punish your child. If you take a moment to think about it, do you really think a belt will cure disbelief in God better than a conversation? Do you really think abandonment will restore faith? Is screaming better than understanding? Are threats of damnation better than the promise that God still loves them? Think about what God doesn't do with His children when they stray from Him. Remember, the Old Testament is one big cycle of apostasy. Belief is abandoned, a period of suffering follows before faith is regained. Remember Jonah, remember David, remember the Israelites. They rejected God multiple times. Despite God's people rejecting Him on multiple occasions, He never abandoned them. Therefore, you should not abandon your child either. If your child has rejected your faith, do not reject your child. Do not kick your child out of the house, especially if they are dependent on you. Christ's words to people were to sin no more, but He never rejected people because they sinned. You should do the same. Okay, God does not reject His children, but He does punish them, doesn't He? Does this mean a lifelong grounding is in order? Not so fast. Remember, God's punishment is actually loving guidance. This is where you need to be careful and examine your emotions closely, as they can easily cloud your judgment on this issue. Your initial instinct to punish your child is likely out of anger and fear for their everlasting soul. It is likely an animal-like reaction to pain, rather than an act of love or guidance. This is why you should not punish your child. Not until you have calmed your emotions over the situation, and that can understandably take some time. Anger seeks vengeance for perceived wrongs. Love seeks correction for the betterment of the loved. Avoid talking down to your child or speaking condescendingly. I know it will be tempting, since their revelation might seem ridiculous at first. After all, how could they deny God? However, please do not make this mistake. If you speak condescendingly, you are likely to alienate them, and thereby make them less likely to listen to you when you offer words of reason. Remember that as a Christian, you are God's ambassador. Your child will see His character in your every action. If your actions are not coming from a place of love, then how will they possibly ever believe that God loves them? Your actions now are so important because they can push your child so far from God that they will never look back, or this can be your only chance to keep the door open. What to do? What if you did get angry? What if you did scream and threaten? What if you did punish? Don't panic, all is hopefully not lost. Recognize that you acted out and what you did was wrong. Then, apologize. Don't expect forgiveness immediately. Do not even feel entitled to forgiveness. What you might have said or done in anger could have severely hurt your child, and they might not easily recover from it. What you need to do then is continue to show them the remorse you feel for your words and/or actions, and never show frustration if forgiveness is taking a while. Forgiveness and the rebuilding of trust will happen gradually, and you must be supportive and encouraging throughout. Never try to rush it. Let your child lead the way to recovery. They will know best what they need in order to heal. Now that disaster has hopefully been averted, let's look at what you can do to handle your child's new worldview. The very best thing you can do is also going to be the hardest. Listen. Listen. Let them speak their heart out. If there are tears, listen patiently through their blubbering. If there are accusations, listen patiently without comment or criticism. Allow them to tell you everything of their, probably very long, journey of how they arrived at their atheistic conclusions. It might even take several sessions. Just listen. And when they are done, give them a hug, thank them for being honest with you, acknowledge the courage that must have taken, and tell them that even though you don't agree with their new worldview, you still love them. And, when you are ready, you'd love to talk to them more about their decision. Just not immediately. You are both probably exhausted from the emotional turmoil alone. Congratulations, you've saved your relationship with your child, rather than destroying it. You've also given a good example of his character, and by doing so, propped the door open for God to come back into their life. Do not engage in discussion unless you are ready to have your beliefs challenged, because they will be challenged. And if you are not ready for it, it is likely you will become defensive and emotional, which will hinder you in getting your point across effectively, if at all. Not to mention the damage you might cause to the relationship which you have done so well in maintaining thus far. When you do engage in discussion, and you find that your child becomes defensive and emotional, it is your responsibility to remain calm and respectful. Respect your child. If they continue to be worked up over the subject, it is probably best to end the conversation for now. Avoid being dismissive, as this will only upset them more, and do not make it out as though you have won the argument and they have lost, because they became upset. This is not a competition. It is a discussion that you are willing to pick up at a later date when they are calm and ready. Make sure they know that you love and respect them and want to have this discussion. If you and/or your child are really struggling to have an ongoing verbal discussion without getting defensive or emotional, it might be a better idea to switch to writing letters to each other. Putting thoughts down on paper can be quite clarifying and less heated or confrontational. And don't forget to spend time on yourself and your relationship with God. Pray for your child and pray for guidance when interacting with them. Pray for strength when your faith is tested, but do not become fearful and withdraw from your child if you do find yourself doubting. After all, people wouldn't become atheists if they did not have convincing arguments. Instead, Be patient with yourself, as God is patient with those who doubt. Jesus didn't get angry and upset with Thomas when he doubted, did he? Stumbling blocks to be wary of. They just need to read the Bible more. While it is reasonable for you to request that they read the Bible more, do not demand it of them. Also, do not assume that they haven't already read the Bible thoroughly, as many people who became atheists say they arrived at their non-belief because they read the whole Bible. The Old Testament is especially a problem. If you've ever read it, you know there are a lot of troubling things in there. Slavery endorsed by God, genocide commanded by God, plural marriage, allowance for raping a girl and then marrying her, weird commandments about not mixing fabrics, etc. The Bible contains many amazing stories and parables of love and mercy, but from a logical perspective, it's not hard to see why someone might reject the Bible after close scrutiny. They just need to go to church more. Again, while it is reasonable for you to request that they attend church with you more, do not demand it of them. If you were to force them, it would only breed bitterness and resentment, closing them off from any message they might otherwise be willing to hear. If they don't want to go to church, you have other options. You can discuss with them after church what was said. And just because they don't attend church doesn't mean they are barred from other church activities, especially ones that can be viewed in a secular light, such as fundraisers and charity or food drives. Keeping them as part of the community will help prevent them from feeling isolated and ostracized, which is very easy to feel when you are an atheist in a heavily Christian community. But if your child finds new community, do not begrudge them of it, but rather support them in their endeavors. After all, being part of a community that loves and accepts you is incredibly important to human well-being. They just didn't pray hard enough. Assuming that your child didn't pray while in the midst of losing their faith does them an incredible disservice. If you were to put yourself in their shoes, and you found yourself faced with losing your faith, I'd bet you'd pray the hardest you'd ever done in your life. Prayer is comforting, but it admittedly can also be a little one-sided. Be empathetic to those who have spent significant energy seeking God's still small voice, but who never heard a reply. They just need to read this book. You might have read a book that was particularly inspiring, or your pastor might recommend one, and there's nothing wrong with requesting that they give it a read, so long as you do so lovingly and respectfully. But bear in mind this is a two-way street, and your child might have a book that they would like you to read, so do not recommend a book if you are not willing to reciprocate. On the other hand, your willingness to read something that they recommend will go a long way towards mutual understanding. They will burn in hell. Do not threaten your child with hellfire and damnation. It highly resembles an abusive relationship. Love me or I'll kill you. Besides, atheists don't believe in hell. If you do threaten hell, you are likely to be met with some common arguments against the doctrine of hell, including but not limited to: if God is a God of love, why would he threaten to inspire a relationship with him? How could a loving, compassionate being send his children to eternal torment? It would be infinitely crueler than any torture a human could hope to mete out. If God is omniscient and loving, why would he create people he knows will reject him, only for them to suffer in hellfire for the rest of eternity? Hell is a doctrine that evolved over time. The earliest books of the Bible don't mention it at all. They just want to sin. Recognize that accusing your child of just wanting to sin is a direct insult towards their character and integrity, so it should come as no surprise if you are met only with disgust and defensiveness. You would too in their position. All this statement can ever achieve is to stop any hope of a constructive conversation in its tracks. Besides, If they really did just want to sin, which requires that they believe in God, wouldn't it be a better option for them to remain a Christian and ask for forgiveness to avoid burning in hell for all eternity? Do you not believe in Zeus because you actually just want to rebel against him? If you really are worried that your child will start behaving badly just because they no longer have a God to answer to, consider for a moment that God is not the only one we answer to. Because we live in a society, we are bound by society's rules, and if we do not abide to them, we are punished accordingly, whether we believe in God or not. We all have a responsibility to society, and the social price to pay for bad behavior is enough to deter most bad actions. They can't prove there is no God. The only ones claiming there is no God are militant, also known as hard or Gnostic atheists, and let's face it, your child most likely isn't one of them. It is more likely your child is a soft, also known as agnostic atheist. Gnostic, meaning to know, and agnostic, meaning not to know, is an important distinction when it comes to atheists, for the sole reason that Gnostic atheists are making the claim there is no God, whereas agnostic atheists are unconvinced of both this claim and the theist claim there is a God, and are awaiting reliable evidence for either claim so as to know which is true. It is important to keep in mind that evidence of God that is convincing to you will probably not meet your child's standard of evidence, which is likely the foundation for them becoming an atheist, the lack of convincing evidence for God. This avenue of discussion can be expected to open a whole new can of worms in terms of stumbling blocks, as you present your evidence for why you believe and your child explains why it is not convincing to them. Be careful, as this will challenge your faith. On the other hand, you might have some knowledge that is able to convince them, and they will probably be more than happy to return to the fold as their skepticism has been satisfied. I just feel it is necessary to warn you that this line of argument is definitely a double-edged sword, which is not to be swung without some preparedness. The journey to atheism. This might all be very new to you, so it is important to appreciate that your child has probably been dealing with this for quite some time. I am going to delve into some studies on the subject of deconversion, in the hopes of providing some enlightenment as to why your child might have become an atheist. However, this should not replace you asking your child what led them to the conclusion of atheism. The information I supply should be viewed as supplementary to what your child has to say, and to give a broader context of atheism. A common assumption among theists is that people most often deconvert for emotional reasons, for example, illness or death in the family, evils and unhappiness in the world, the futility of prayer, to name a few. While this can sometimes be the case, these reasons are far less common when atheists were asked their reasons for deconverting. What Perez and Villiers found to be the driving force of deconversion was discrepancies between what one would expect from the world if religious tenets and beliefs were true, and what one sees and experiences in life. These discrepancies are most often highlighted by being well-read in science, history, and religion, leading to the generalization that atheists tend to be intelligent people. The thing to note here is that in being well-read, a person often learns how to think instead of what to think. Unfortunately, an all too common shortcoming of religious upbringing is that children are taught what to think, and this will always crumble when faced with even the slightest bit of critical thinking. Barbour studied many autobiographical accounts of deconversion and came to the conclusion that loss of religious belief can be linked to a desire for personal independence in the immediate context of a religious family. While this can be interpreted as your child merely going through a rebellious phase, which could just as well be the case, what is important to recognize is that as they grow older, all children want to develop a personal identity for themselves. In this search for identity, they are likely to examine aspects of their current life and decide what they do and don't want to keep based on their personal value system. And while their religious upbringing may have helped them form part of this value system, finding aspects of the religion lacking may just cause them to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. The upside of this is that if you can convince them there is a baby worth valuing, this may prove to be the path back to God. The journey to atheism happens over time. It is the gradual build-up of doubts, questions, and dissatisfactions. Things that bring doubt and undermine faith, such as the accuracy of the Bible, its incompatibility with science, the hypocrisy rife within Christianity, and, when asking for help with these problems and doubts, the unsatisfactory or straight-up dismissive answers received. I remember attending a Bible studies class where a young man worked up the courage to ask something along the lines of, "How do we know that the Bible is true?" And I remember clearly one of the older women hushing him, saying, "You can't say that." At the time I was young and wasn't brave enough to speak up and offer him consolation. I'm willing to bet that young man is now an atheist. Theists need to recognize and acknowledge the shortcomings of their fellow believers and their religion before we can hope to curb the flow of people away from Christianity. A very interesting observation by Altemeyer and Hunsberger is that people in the process of deconverting have an uncontainable urge to find answers to their concerns, as well as a strong commitment to truth and integrity. Vogt agrees, stating, "Most atheists I have met are smart, sincere, and good-hearted." Altemeyer and Hunsberger go on to suggest that this commitment to truth and integrity stems from religious training itself. This is where it gets interesting. Altemeyer and Hunsberger suggest that religious upbringing could be so successful in instilling a drive to seek truth and integrity that, should a child detect any issues within their belief system, they will not hesitate to assess the truthfulness of their own religion. On the other hand, Barbour, while also considering the concern over truth as an important element to deconversion, argues that this concern comes from a duty towards intellectual honesty and the ethics of belief, stating that every person has a moral responsibility to justify their beliefs with enough evidence. It would be interesting to find out what your child thinks on this matter. Altemeyer and Hunsberger also found that atheists are unable to resort to faith to find answers, since they do not view faith as a virtue, but rather something that severs them from rationality. Well, wait a second, how can someone not have faith? If not in God, then at least in others. Doesn't everyone, atheist and theist alike, have faith when sitting down that a chair won't collapse under them? Faith that memories are accurate? Faith that the sun will rise tomorrow? Well, yes and no. What you and I might term as faith, most atheists prefer to call reasonable trust or confidence. That is, they put as much trust in something as is reasonably deserved based on a combination of past experience, verifiable evidence, and science. This is possibly the biggest hurdle on the road back to religion, as an atheist will need to be convinced to value faith again. As to how this can be done, it is unique for every person, and while there are plenty of stories of conversion back to Christianity from atheism, it is impossible to predict, without knowing them personally, what it might take for your child's personal conversion. I would like to stress again that the information given in this chapter may not all apply to your child, so it is important to talk and listen to what your child has to say on the matter, and hopefully this information can add a little more insight into what your child might be thinking when they say certain things. In the end, it all comes down to your personal relationship with your child. Conclusion. So your child is an atheist, and it is understandable to be upset about it. However, you must not let this guide your interactions with your child. Rather allow God to guide you with His love and compassion. It is not necessary for this revelation to be the end of your child's relationship with you or with God. Do not abandon your child. No matter your disagreements, they are still your child and therefore still your responsibility. Do not punish your child, or you risk losing their love and trust, and you will need those if there is to be any hope of them returning to God. Listen to and respect your child, and practice patience with them and yourself. Your faith is likely to be tested in this time, so it is important to prepare yourself, but don't allow it to close you off from your child. Thank you for watching. Please leave a like if this video was helpful, and share if you think it might help someone else. Feel free to share your experience in the comments below, and I will leave you with the wise words of Pastor Jack Wellman. No one was ever argued into heaven. Pray for them, try to reason with them, but lead their conversion up to God. And always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 15. I emphasize doing so in gentleness and respect. Don't debate, don't argue. You can win an argument and lose a soul. I would rather lose an argument and win a soul for Christ any day.